right, so let's go ahead and jump on in and start talking about one step better. So think of every diet in the world. Okay, every diet that's ever come out, or almost every single diet, focuses on one thing, right? In the end, they all try to get you to eat less processed junk food and more whole foods, or more whole, unprocessed foods. Almost every single one tries to get you to eat more lean protein and more vegetables and fruits, and less of the undesirable foods, okay? Because there's one thing, we have a vast ocean of evidence that basically says humans are healthier when we eat more whole, unprocessed foods and less refined processed foods. Okay? It's pretty simple. So let's strive to be one step better so that we can start focusing each day and each meal on getting just a little bit closer to more whole, unprocessed foods and away from the opposite end of the spectrum. So let's talk about a spectrum first of what processed to whole foods would look like, because it's not like as soon as you do something to a food, it's now bad, right? Because that's not how this works. There's a whole spectrum. So if you guys watched my carb video, this was probably 2 weeks ago by now, I talked a little bit about a spectrum of carbs. You can take any food. So potatoes are going to sound familiar if you watch that video, because this is the easiest one to explain it with. On one end of the spectrum, we would have a baked potato with just a salt and pepper on it, right? This would be at the whole awesome end of the spectrum. Moving down the spectrum, you would have, say, homemade home fries or homemade hash browns, where it's still a potato, but you've done a little bit to it now. You've added some oil, you've cooked it a little bit in a different way to make it a little bit tastier, but it's still a good food. It's still a pretty solid choice. And then moving down the spectrum all the way, you'd have like French fries, right? So at one end of the spectrum, you'd have French fries where they don't fill you up. You can kind of binge on them. They don't really provide any value to your body. And on the other end of the spectrum, you would have the potato, which provides a ton of value to your body. It's pretty easy to stop eating when you're full. You're not really going to binge on it. And you've got stuff in between. The idea of one step better is moving from this end of the spectrum closer to this end of the spectrum, okay? So it doesn't happen with just carbs. Let's talk about chicken, okay? So on one end of the spectrum, you would have chicken breast. Fantastic food. It's pretty easy to stop eating when full. It's just straight up chicken breast. Moving down the spectrum a little bit, the reason that I made baked chicken last night is because I knew I was making this video. You would have your baked and breaded chicken. It's still a pretty solid choice. It's still, chicken breast, but now we've added a little bit to it to make it a little bit tastier. It's a little bit easier to keep eating it, but it's still chicken breast, right? And then all the way at the other end of the spectrum, you have like chicken nuggets, where it's just like free for all, like McDonald's chicken nuggets, free for all. Like I can just eat these things all day long and never get full, And then one more to explain this, I'm going to take peanuts. One end you'd have peanuts, just straight up raw peanuts, not roasted, salted, all that stuff, just straight up raw peanuts. Delicious still. Moving down the spectrum a little bit, you'd have like your party peanuts, your roasted, salted peanuts. Moving down from there, you'd have peanut butter. And then moving down from there, you'd have like Reese's Cups, right? So all foods exist on a spectrum in some way. You can put any single food on the spectrum and say, I can make this food worse by doing stuff to it, or I can make it better by doing stuff to it. There's always a spectrum, okay? So the idea of one step better is to move up that spectrum. But it's not just by changing the food. You can do a whole lot of things. So here's some things you can do. One thing, you can add good stuff, right? So you can move up the spectrum by adding in, so take any meal, and you say, okay, I don't have vegetables at this meal. You can add vegetables into a meal. Or you can add lean protein into a meal. So say you're having a salad, and it's like, oh, this is a bomb-ass salad. I got some greens, I got some olives, I got a little bit of cheese and some olive oil and vinegar. How can you make that meal a little bit better? Add some grilled chicken on top of that. Boom. That meal's fantastic. Okay? So you can always add stuff in to make a meal better. Something else you could do, you could subtract food. Okay? So you can remove, say, processed food from the meal. You can remove a caloric beverage. So let's go back to our salad. Say you have that salad with olives, with cheese, oil, vinegar, and now you've got the grilled chicken. If you want to make that meal even better, remove some of the cheese, okay? Or say you were having a beer or a glass of wine with that meal. Remove that alcohol, and you've got that meal just a little bit better than it was before. Does that make sense? So you can always add stuff in to make a meal better. You can add good stuff, or you could subtract out the quote-unquote bad stuff. from a meal. Or you can move up the spectrum. Okay, so those three things you can do already. Move up the spectrum to make a food better, add the good stuff in, subtract out the bad stuff. Another thing you could do, not having to do with the meal at all, with the food choices itself, is to change your scenery. Okay, so if you're used to eating at your desk or eating in front of the TV or on the couch, move to a table. Even if it's the exact same meal, eating without distraction, there's tons of research that's going to back me up here. Eating without distraction is better for you. You're going to focus a little bit better on your meal. You're probably going to slow down a little bit. You're going to listen to your hunger cues a little bit more. You're not just going to mindlessly eat. Okay, so changing your scenery is one thing you can do to make your meal better. Even if you don't want to change the meal itself. Say you're having Kraft macaroni and cheese, and you don't want to change that meal because that's what you want right now. Eat it at a table and just focus on what you're doing rather than eating in front of the TV. That's a little bit better. You could slow down. So I had this video last week. Eating slowly, research proves that it is simply better for you. It's a healthier option in the long run. It fills you up quicker. Well, I guess slower. Fills you up better. Leaves you more satisfied with your meals. Helps with your digestion. Helps with basically everything. Okay? So say you don't change anything else. You have that Kraft macaroni and cheese. If you just slow down a little bit, that's another way to make it one step better. So that's a whole bunch of different options right there, right? I told you can move up the spectrum or down the spectrum, I guess. You can add the good stuff in. You can subtract out bad stuff. You can change your scenery. You can slow down. All of these things are just small incremental changes to make it one step better, make your meal one step better. Now, the goal of all of this is to make every single meal just one step better every single day. And these will add up really quickly over time. You're trying to create essentially a cumulative storm of really, really, really good choices. So maybe you start this on Monday, and say you start it today. On Friday, you should be pretty solid in making really good choices because you're thinking, okay, I can add in some vegetables, I can add in some protein, I can remove out this beer, I can eat at a table. And then all of that kind of comes together in 1 to 2 weeks to 2 years to 6 years, right? Because it's never gonna be perfect. You're always gonna focus on getting a little bit better. So, if you guys have any questions about that, please let me know. Your action step for the week and the next 2 weeks, focus on making every meal just a little bit better. Sweet. I'm gonna